Good morning. Where in the world is everybody? I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to see you here. Our lesson today is taken from the book of Exodus, chapters 19 and 20, and it's about the Decalogue. I never did much like that word, but it fits. It's the 10 Commandments. And I've read this before, but I had forgotten. In my mind, when Moses received the 10 Commandments, he received them on a tombstone. Or that's what it looked like to me. Tables of stone, but here it's all verbal. I think that happens later on. We read about that in Deuteronomy. But the 10 Commandments. Children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt. The same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. For they were departed from Rephidim and were come to the desert of Sinai and had pitched in the wilderness, and there Israel camped before the mount. Two words here in this same verse that I want to pay attention to. They came to the desert of Sinai and pitched in the wilderness. When I think of a wilderness, I think of the deep, dark jungles in the Amazon, so thick you can't walk through it, heavy, big trees. And I think of a desert, I think of sand and nothing else. Well, these two words mean about the same thing, which is simply an uninhabited place. One definition I read said a place to lead cattle, another said a pasture, but it's where not much grows and not many people are. And that's where, God found Moses and spoke to him through the burning bush. He was on the backside of the desert. He was over there in that place where nobody goes, sort of by himself, him and the sheep. So they're in a barren place before the mount. Now, I understand this mountain to be on the southern end of the Sinai Peninsula, and I don't know where Moses was when he was on the backside of the desert. I thought it was backside of that mountain, but somewhere down in that area. And I don't know which side of the mountain they were on. I figure northeast or northeast. But anyway, they were camped there near the mountain, but not at the mountain. Now, verse 3 says, And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. Verse 4, he reminds them of how they were protected and provided for supernaturally by God when they left Egypt. We need to be reminded of those things sometimes, don't we? But he said, because I took care of you and can take care of you and will take care of you, if you will obey my voice, you will be a peculiar treasure. Peculiar. We don't want to be known as peculiar, do we? We want to be like everybody else. No, that's not one of the meanings of the word peculiar is special. A special to God. He wanted them to be a special, unique possession of his own, privately his, all his. That's what he wants from his children today. He wants us to be the apple of his eye, the most cherished of all people. He said something about eagle's wings, and I want to look at a verse in the book of Jeremiah here just a second. From what I understand about an eagle, and eagle is the national bird, represents the USA. They're a very majestic animal, even though they eat dead stuff. We do too, don't we? But anyway, they're a very majestic bird, and I've read that they were the most tender of mothers. In Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 3. Now this is some years later. Israel was holiness unto the Lord, and the first fruits of his increase. All that devour him shall offend. Evil shall come upon them, saith the Lord. Hear ye the word of the Lord, O house of Jacob, and all the families of the house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord, what iniquity have your fathers found in me, that they are gone far from me, and have walked after vanity, and are become vain? Neither said they, where is the Lord that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, that led us through the wilderness? Here's another description of the land that they were in and that they went through. Through a land of deserts and of pits, through a land of drought and of the shadow of death, through a land that no man passed through, and where no man dwelt. This is the desert and the wilderness. And I brought you into a plentiful country to eat the fruit thereof, and the goodness thereof. But when ye entered, ye defiled my land, and made my heritage an abomination. The priest had said not, where is the Lord? And they that handle the law knew me not. The pastors also transgressed against me, and the prophets prophesied by Baal, and walked after things that do not profit. They saw the hand of God in judgment against Egypt, and they saw the hand of God in care and delivering of themselves from that place of bondage. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and read. Verse 6. He says, "And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel." A holy nation is a people that's set apart to God. A kingdom of priests. What is a kingdom of priests? What does a priest do? A priest offers sacrifices on behalf of others. He is sort of between man and God. Of course, a priest, Aaron and his sons, who were selected as the priest, had to go in and make sacrifice for themselves, then sacrifice on behalf of the people. So they were kind of between God and man, and they also taught the people of God. They weren't necessarily prophets, but they were representatives. And I think that I read somewhere this week, it sums it up pretty clearly. A kingdom of priests will be those who show forth God's excellencies. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what we are supposed to do, to show forth God's excellencies. How do we do that? Actions speak louder than words. So we do that by living according to God's standards that He's given us all through the New Testament. Verse 6, he says, "Ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. These are the words which I shall speak unto the children of Israel." And Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. All these words is not that many words, is it? If I understand this correctly, he just said, I want your people to be a special, peculiar people to represent me on the earth. He didn't give them any details, all right? But verse 8 says, "And all the people answered together and said, All that the Lord hath spoken we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people to the Lord." I never gave this much thought before, but it seems to me like these people exercised great faith right here, didn't they? How is your faith? How is my faith? It's easy to have faith after we have seen how God delivered. Is that not right? They had plenty of reason to exercise faith in God because they had seen so clearly, distinctly, God's deliverance. God can handle it. Speaking of being a holy nation and a kingdom of priests, Israel didn't do a very good job representing God to the world. I think he has chosen his church to represent him to the world today. And in 2 Corinthians 5:20, Paul said in writing to the church at Corinth, "Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ." An ambassador is one who represents his home country in a foreign country. Where is your home country? The scriptures tell us that believers have our conversation or our citizenship in heaven. So I think the point is the children of God, especially his church, are representatives of God to the people around us. We represent heaven, not the earth. So our lives should be quite different from the world. And like I said, actions speak louder than words. We need to speak, and we also need to live the type of life that others can see Jesus in us. Verse 9, "And the Lord said to Moses, Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee, and believe thee forever. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord." You ever notice someone speaking to an individual, and you know it's obvious. He's speaking for the benefit of all those others who are listening? Sometimes that's appropriate. That's what God did here. And he said, I'm going to speak to you. I'm going to come to you in this thick cloud and speak to you in order that the people may hear what I say to you. And also that the people will believe you forever. They heard what Moses' instructions were, so they knew whether he was telling them the truth or not, didn't they? Because they heard it themselves. "And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes. And be ready against the third day, for the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai." Did you wash your clothes before you came this morning? Did you come to hear a message from the Lord? What is this teaching us? We're supposed to wash, clean up, and take a bath before we come to meet with God's people for public worship? I think that's appropriate. I haven't always done that. But I read something some time back about how we're to dress when we go to church. Now, I don't intend to start a controversy here, but this person said, "How do you dress when you go to a funeral, and who are you there to honor?" Of course, you go there to honor the deceased and his family. "How do you dress when you go to I started to say funeral again, I meant wedding. How do you dress when you go to a wedding, and who are you there to honor?" Well, the bride. "How do you dress when you go to church, and who are you there to honor?" Is the answer obvious? Pretty much, isn't it? Well, he said, sanctify yourself. The sanctification he's talking about is washing their clothes, and I think their bodies too, but that's an indication that the heart was clean also. Sanctification. Now, verse 12, "And thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves that ye go not up to the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever toucheth the mount shall be surely put to death." Well, an unholy person cannot relate to a holy God in some respects. That's not a true statement, but I don't know how to put that. But there's no comparison between a sinner and a sinless spirit, is there? There's no comparison. So he wanted to keep him off of that mountain, not to get too close. In verse 17, We read, and Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. The nether part of the mount is the plain around the base of the mountain. And I understand that there was, I've read someone said there was a 400-acre field there for these people to meet in between the camp and the mountain. So they came out from the camp toward the mountain and stood there in the plain. 400-acre field, I don't know how to tell you how big that is, but whoever wrote this that I'm telling you about said there was a 3-foot square of space for 2 million people to stand in on 400 acres. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if there hadn't been 3 million people there. I don't know. But anyway, this is a large group of people, isn't it? That's even more exciting than our Razorback football, isn't it? Where they hold 50,000 in War Memorial Stadium. 2 to 3 million people come to meet God all at once. Verse 18, and Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. Moses spoke to God. God answered him with a voice. Now, God is spirit. He can take on a body if he wants to. Jesus did. But God is spirit. And I don't remember where it was, somewhere it says Moses spoke with God face to face. I think that's a figure of speech. I don't think Moses saw God in a body visibly. But what we have here is a manifestation of God in the smoke and the fire, the lightning and the thunder and the earthquake. If anything would get your attention, wouldn't that? I think it got their attention. It scared them to death. And I imagine it would me too. When the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down on Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up. And in the last verse of this chapter says, Moses went down unto the people and spake unto them. Here is where he gives the 10 rules or standards to live by. He says, first of all, in chapter 20, verse 1, and God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. If you stop to think about that's an awesome thought, isn't it? How he dealt with Egypt and led them out and took care of them. And he said, I think we could read in that, he might be saying or thinking, now you see what I've done to you. On account of that, I want you to pay attention and have no other God before you. He says, thou shalt have no other God before you. There is no other God. But he's saying not have anyone or anything before me, before, ahead of, or above. No thing, no one is to be more important than God. And, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Now he gives the reason for saying that in the next few verses. I have a carving of an Irish setter dog. My cousin carved this out of wood probably 40, 50 years ago. Gave it to me one time. Well, it's sitting there on my desk. It's a really good piece of work, you know. What's it good for? It's just about like those little figurines. It's just nice to look at, that's all. But he said, don't you have any of those graven images before you? Because, verse 5, thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I am the Lord thy God. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. There's nothing necessarily wrong with a pretty picture of anything, but it's not to be worshipped. It's not to be bowed down to, certainly not bowed down to and worshipped. I was in a church many, many years ago that I'd heard of growing up, didn't know anything about it much. And they had a big sign out in front of the church house. And there was someone had painted a picture of Jesus in the garden, sitting there on a rock with the flowing robes and all of that. I thought, isn't that a graven image, so to speak, or something like that? I always wondered about that. And while I was there 3 or 4 years, finally one time in a business meeting, an old man got up and said, that's not right. Why didn't they say that 20 or 30 years ago? I guess they thought it was right when they did it. I don't know that it was wrong. It just didn't impress me as being the right thing to do. If your sign should identify who you are. Anyway, we're not to worship anything or anyone except God and God Almighty. When we do, if we do, that is spiritual adultery. Verse 6, 5 and 6 go together. He said, I'll visit the iniquity of fathers upon children for 3 or 4 generations. Children take on certain traits of their parents. Maybe not all of them, but in most cases, some of them. So whatever tendencies parents have may be transferred down by heredity to the children. And in that way, this iniquity is passed on to them. But it also can be that what great-grandpa did could affect what the great-grandson, how it affects him. But on the other hand, he said in verse 6, showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. His mercies are new every morning. Verse 6, and we've had is that the second commandment? No other gods, no images. Verse 7 says, is number 3, isn't it? Vain. He said, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. How do we take the Lord's name in vain? The word vain means empty, worthless. So when we say anything that is not showing great respect for God, if we use his name without that respect, it's vain. Hypocrisy is an example of vain words. Saying I am this or I am that when you're not. Could be failing to fulfill a promise. Using his name in vain, I think, indicates anything we can say that is unbecoming to God. Then in verse 8 he says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Sabbath is the 7th. When Jesus came to the earth and died for the sins of all mankind, rose again the 3rd day, it happened to be the first day of the week, and the disciples then met together for rest and worship on the first day of the week instead of the 7th day. I read a book by an old man who wrote 50, 100 years ago, I don't know. He was from Malvern. Brother John might know or know of him. I can't think of his name. But he wrote a book. The title of the book was 40 Years on the Rock Island Line. And it was kind of a biography of his life. He was raised over in Haskell. His dad operated a hotel You remember a hotel over there? I don't either. That was a long time ago. But anyway, he finally got to work for the railroad, worked for them a long time. He said even the great railroads, and I don't know what year this was, sometime in the last 150 years, even the great railroads learned if they would rest their equipment one day out of 7, it would last much longer. So there's all kinds of benefits in obeying the truth. Do what you're supposed to do just because you're supposed to do it, and you'll be blessed. I'm afraid we don't hallow the Sabbath day like he meant for us to. I mean, the first day of the week, like he was talking about here on the Sabbath. He said, verse 10, the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is in thy gates. He didn't leave anybody out, did he? For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Well, that's a pretty good reason to hallow the Sabbath day, but I think the resurrection of Jesus Christ is even perhaps greater reason to hallow the first day. But I'm not going to argue with you about that. Verse 12 says, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. In the New Testament, that same commandment is referred to as the First Commandment with promise. Well, the other commandments have promises with them too, but this is the one that's pretty evident. During the times that Jesus walked on the earth, there were Pharisees, and some of these Pharisees refused to take care of their old parents. Why, I don't know, but their excuse was, I've got this money, but it's korban, which means it's set aside to go into the temple treasury. That's not what God said, is it? I mean, he expects us to give to his work, but he also expects us to take care of our parents when they need help. And these people were refusing to do that. So the commandment is to honor our father and mother, and that means from birth to death. As long as our parents are living, we are to honor them. That's pretty easy to understand. Verse 12 says, thou shalt not kill. I think the word kill here perhaps could have been better translated murder, because I think that's what it means. The Israelites killed a lot of people. A lot of people killed the Israelites too. But in war and battle, I think self-defense is a sufficient reason to kill someone, but I don't think we ought to have malice in our heart. That's the problem, is the malice and hatred in our heart, and perhaps a personal revenge that would motivate us to kill someone else. And Jesus said, if you hate your brother, you're a murderer. So it's just the condition of the heart that is more important than the outward manifestation of the heart. Jesus said in the New Testament, the scripture says that vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Verse 14 is the seventh commandment. Thou shalt not commit adultery. The greatest institution I think God ever established was the home. Man and woman married to raise children. And adultery, of course, is one of the things that will just ruin that, just break it up terribly. But in addition to that, Hebrews 13:4 says, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. But whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. God judges sin, period. And I don't know just what he means here any more than just God will judge. But it ought to be enough for us to see that we need not engage in that kind of activity. number 8, verse 15 says simply, thou shalt not steal. Why do people have to have these rules and regulations? Don't you know it's wrong to steal? Well, maybe so, maybe not. All society must have guidelines and rules to go by, or we couldn't get along. I get tired of some of the laws of our country. But basically, laws are for our benefit, and we need some of them. I don't know that we need all of them, but we need some of them. Philippians Chapter 2 says, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in holiness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. What that is saying is, you take care of your own business and look to see how you can help your neighbor. Who is my neighbor? As I understand it, my neighbor is anyone who is around me at any particular time. You know, I always thought of my neighbor as those that live next door or down the street. Anybody that is around you at any time is your neighbor. So we're not to treat them unjustly, certainly not to steal from them. Verse 16 is commandment number 9. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Bearing false witness is lying, deceiving, or speaking unjustly. And the scriptures somewhere in the New Testament, I should have looked this up to see where it was. I've read it many times. Speak evil of no man. You know, our mothers used to tell us, if you can't say something good about somebody, don't say anything. That's pretty good advice. Commandment number 10 is in chapter 17. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Covetousness. Covet means a strong desire, a longing. Now, I knew these scriptures many, many, many years ago. And I used to hear these preachers say, I covet your prayers. And I'd think, what? It's a longing for, a strong desire for. And the problem with covetousness is that we want something that doesn't belong to us without paying the normal price for it. That's human nature. We read in the New Testament the word concupiscence, funny word. That is a longing, like covet, but this is a longing that is especially for that which is forbidden. Why is it? Human nature. We desire those things we know we can't have or not supposed to have. We want them harder, worse than anything, don't we? That's the flesh that we need to overcome. In regard to stealing, thou shalt not steal, Ephesians 4:28 says, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. So why do we go to work? We go to work to earn expenses of living so that we can serve the Lord and help those who are in need. That's pretty simple and to the point, isn't it? These are not 10 suggestions. These are 10 commandments that were given to Israel, the sons of Jacob. Is there any reason why we shouldn't accept them as given to us as well? I know we're not under the law. The book of Galatians chapter 3, verse 24 says the law is our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ that we might be justified by faith. So Paul said, if it wasn't for the law, I would not have known I was a sinner. Get that? The law pointed out to people that they could not live a life that is good enough to be acceptable to God. So Jesus died so that we can be justified by his righteousness. The commission to the church tells us that we're to go and make disciples and baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, and to teach them to observe whatsoever I have commanded you. The teaching portion of the church is very important. The going is important. The making of disciples, the baptism is important. But it's very important to teach the teachings of Christ. I'm so thankful that God loved us enough to give us standards to live by. You remember growing up, did your parents tell you, don't do that? God said, thou shalt not do that. They did that for our own benefit because they knew what kind of trouble we could get in if we went on and did that. Right? God knows we ought to trust Him as we trust our parents. And I know in today's society it's not like it used to be. Nothing is. Seems like children are not as disciplined as they used to be. But having guidelines, rules, and discipline is an evidence of love. I thank God for the parents that I had that raised me right. I wish it had took. But I thank God for His love for us, His concern for us enough to say, don't do this. You're forbidden to do that because it's in our own best interest and for His honor and glory. One more thing. Two more things. 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17 says, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, in order that the man of God may be perfect or completely fitted, truly furnished unto all good works. The Scriptures are here for us to live by. The 10 Commandments were the first instructions, I guess, that Israel got. But the New Testament Scriptures is the commandments of Christ, and they're given to us for our benefit. I think old Job set us a good example. It says that Job was one who feared God and eschewed evil. Eschewed, a funny word. It means run from it, get away from it. We need to follow his example, have reverence for God, and get away from evil. All right, I'll close with that. Thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for your attention. The announcements are Sunday school next week, preaching next week. Next week is Deacon's Benevolent Offering Day. We have services Wednesday night as usual. And next Sunday, the 31st, there'll be a mission committee meeting at 9 a.m., Sunday school and worship at the same time, a fish fry from 2 to 4 p.m., and trunk or treat 4 to 6 p.m. Do you have prayer requests you'd like to make?